Hi, my name is Mike Rodriguez with Graftel, and today I'm here to talk about the Model 9623 EV leak rate monitor. First, we're going to start off with covering the general function and features of the panel layout and some of the internal features. Starting off with our supply here, we have a 3/8 inch female MPT connection. From there, we have our regulator with our digital inlet pressure gauge. The inlet pressure can be up to 200 psi-G of either clean air or nitrogen. After that is Victor 1. Victor 1 essentially isolates the regulator and pressure gauge from the rest of the box. From there is Victor 2. Victor 2 has 4 flow paths to choose from. The bypass, which allows us to do a quick fill of our test volume, and we could also swing between the high, medium, and low flow ranges of the flow meters. From there we have Victor 3. Victor 3 essentially acts as an isolation downstream of the flow meters during quick fill phases and depressurizations of the box. Next is test pressure. We have the test pressure along with the test volume here, and the test volume has a 3/8 inch NPT fitting just like the supply, and the test pressure can handle up to 100 psi-G of test to the volume. A couple of the other features that are floating around the box here, the test port. The test port acts as a straight connection to the high, medium, and low flow ranges for calibration. Over here, a very neat feature is our pneumatic generator with the yellow valve here. The pneumatic generator allows us to charge the internal battery when the unit is on or when the unit is off. So when I turn it on, you'll hear it here, and the generator is on. I'm going to turn it off very briefly and just show you a little bit more how it works. So you have the box powered up. The green power button here is signifying that we're on VDC voltage essentially. If I disconnect it, it'll turn yellow and signifying that we're actually on battery. And the battery lasts approximately about 10 hours depending on use and how bright your screen is. So if I decide I need to charge the battery while the unit is on during a test, I could turn on the air generator and then it now signifies blue. And the air generator is independent from all other connections and isolation valves. It's directly from the supply. So as long as your supply is around 100 pounds or so, you'll be able to charge the battery at any time when the unit is on or off. Next, we'll go over the touchscreen and some of the additional menus that follow. Starting off in the upper left corner here, we have the gas selection button. It's selected currently on air, and just by pressing it, it'll toggle from nitrogen and go back to air. For the test we're going to be doing in a bit, we're going to be using a nitrogen bottle, so I'm going to keep it selected nitrogen. Below that is the test pressure indicator. If you hit the test pressure, it'll toggle to the inlet pressure, which we have already preset to 80.4 psi-G. Below that, we have our units. psi-G is what it's in now. By just pressing the button, you could toggle to KSI, bar, and then back to psi-G. Some other unit options that you have are for the flow: SCCM, SLPM, SCFM, and SCFH. So I'm just going to bring it back to SCCM, and depending on what meter you're on, when you use your 4-way valve at Victor 2 over here, you could switch between the high to medium to low, and I'm going to just bring it on back to high. During a flow test, you also have the option to do a flow averaging, but I typically just prefer to kind of just use my eyes and just kind of call it as I see it. Also, there's the option to record during flow, and we'll get a little bit more into that later on. And there's a zero button. I'll give you a little bit of a preview of that. You can zero the test pressure, you can zero the flow range that you're on, and we'll cycle through all of these zero functions when we actually set up for a test in a bit. Next, we're going to go over some of the settings of the leak rate monitor by hitting the gear in the lower right corner over here. Starting off with the first in the upper left here is the display. The display gives you a bunch of different options. You have the option to set the system date, the system time, backlight, and an extensive decimal option system that covers all 3 of the flow ranges along with the pressure and their specific units. So essentially what you can do here is pick whatever range you want to tweak the decimals on, and you can change the number of decimal places for all the ranges and a particular unit for that range or the pressure. Next, I'm going to talk about stability. Stability is an optional feature that can be turned on or off, and is a color coding system that allows the user to have an indication of stability by the definitions that I'll explain here. So for instance, on a low flow range, if the flow rate is changing less than 2% with respect to the full scale of the range that it's on, you'll have a green indicator on your bar. 10% orange, not as stable, red, 30% extremely unstable. Typically things are always going to be green, and you have the option to change to what percentage you want to define the stability criteria. And you could pick the individual ranges for that feature to work. Next is the filter. The filter essentially acts as a response rate, and you have the option to toggle it between the low, medium, and high. So 0 and 1 essentially is immediate response. Anything above that, you start to slow down the response of the box. I prefer to keep it at a 0 to 1 just so you can see what's going on real time at any given time. And this filtering system kicks in once the flow is within 5% of the full scale. So it's relatively stable when the filtering kicks in. And you also have the option to change that feature as well. Next is data recording. Data recording, pretty neat feature. A USB stick is needed. I do have one handy here, so that's something that we're going to talk about a little bit more once we get to the test phase. But what we have here is date format, time format, settings, so you can actually pick when you do an auto record what the interval is. So for the test that we're going to do in a little bit, we're going to set it to 5 seconds so it'll automatically record a data set every 5 seconds. And then file and data comes in handy, so in the field once the recording's done, you can go to show files on your USB and we could open up a file and we could review the data. So we'll be doing that shortly as well. Next is nozzle check. Nozzle check is an optional item that we provide. I do have here one handy, a sample nozzle. This particular one is 310 SCCM at around 379 kPa, which is around 55 psi. So these come in handy for maybe pre-test checks or post-test checks of the leak rate monitor box in the field. So what you would do is you would connect this to the test volume and you would hit your target pressure, and the meter, by bringing it up, you'll match that pressure and then you'll get the flow. So for instance, for this one, 310 would be with the passing fail criteria by default of 5% full scale. You would then know if your box is looking good. So these do come in handy for checks, throughout the phases of using the box. And you have the option to, pick the particular flow rate, operating pressure, and pass-fail criteria for all three ranges by using the config feature over here. Next is the diagnostic. A little bit more additional feature than the nozzle checks. You can get really deep into the box and get some details of how the meters and the pressure gauges are performing. So a real simple check here. It gives you some self-explanatory instructions. Have the regulator zeroed, have Victor 1 closed, have Victor 3 opened. Be sure that Victor 2 is set to bypass what you have. And by hitting the next button, it automatically kicks into a diagnostic. And from there, it'll give you some useful information, especially on the flow meters, if there's a suspicion that maybe you've pressurized the box too high, spike in pressure perhaps, or if you suspect there may be water or something in the box. We can get some general indicators of ambient conditions of the meters themselves in terms of what pressure they're running at and what temperature they're at. So by hitting the details on the flow, which I may need to wait until this actually finishes, but when I do get over here, we'll be able to look and see what the ambient pressure is at and temperature is, and typically we should be seeing like 14.5 or so depending on your elevation, and temperatures in Celsius, in the 26s or 27s. So as you can see here, the low is reading 14.5, temperature is reading 27.8, and pretty much matching for the other two units as well. So this is a really nice indicator that the meters at rest are at least measuring normal ambient conditions. Pressure gauges as well. You have the options to see if there's pressure applied and what the temperature of the gauges are. Also gives some battery management stuff in terms of power charge and whatnot. So you can get an indication if there's any issues with the battery. You can send us a report and we can do a diagnostic and see if there is an issue with the internal battery. Briefly, we'll talk about calibration. It is a locked menu, so if this is just strictly for the Cal Lab, there's a password, but it does give you full calibration features for both the inlet and the test pressure gauges, along with all three ranges to do your span and zero adjustments to fine-tune these and keep them within calibration. Miscellaneous, not much there, but we do have our sound enabled on or off, and might not come in handy in those loud environments, but you can turn the sound on and off if you choose. And that covers all the settings of the Model 9623 EV. Now we're going to go over how to safely set up, connect, fill a test volume, and do a test along with the depressurization. So starting off, I'm just going to do a sanity check here. I'm verifying that my regulator's backed off. My Victor 1 is closed. My Victor 2 is set to bypass. My Victor 3 is isolating the meters. And I have the test volume opened. I do already have a supply introduced, and I'm just going to verify that. So right now we're looking around 81.86 PSIG inlet, so I'm satisfied with that. Everything seems to be in place in order here. I'm going to do a quick zero of everything as just a sanity check. So by hitting the zero button, I'm going to just zero my test pressure. Got the successful that was completed. I'll zero the high flow meter. And I believe it might have went really quick. Yep, high flow meter successful. After that, I'm just going to toggle real quick to mid flow range. Zero the mid flow. Zero is indicated. Cycle to low. We'll do a zero on the low. That's been successful. I'm going to bring it back up to high. So everything's been zeroed. Everything's looking good here. I'm going to get ready to make a connection now to the test volume. So I'm going to connect that really quick. And as I do that, I just want to note that I also have a isolation valve in between the box and the test volume to protect our meter from any backflow or anything like that, and to isolate when we're doing the depressurization. So we'll see that in action as we go further into this test. So for this test, I'm going to target a 24 PSIG test volume pressure. So I'm just going to start off by opening Victor 1 and utilizing my regulator to build up 24 pounds of pressure. And that's essentially building up to my isolation valve right here. And then we'll introduce that to the test volume very shortly. So we'll bring it right around 24. And I've already ensured that I'm on Victor 2 with the bypass, so we'll do a quick fill, and that we're isolated once again, so nothing's going to be charging back into the flow meter array. So by opening this up, going to introduce this to our test volume, and we're going to fill, and we'll let that regulate out, and we'll see if there's any adjustments that need to be needed before we start to cycle through the flow ranges. So once everything stabilizes out, give it just a bit. Should be right around 24 once it's all said and done. And I'll bring it up just a bit. The regulator allows for some really good fine tuning. So I think we'll keep it right there at 24.01. So from there, we'll start to monitor our flow. So I'm going to just take Victor 2 and bring it onto the high flow range and see what kind of flows we have, and determine if we need to make any moves to the low. So also, I have to slowly open up Victor 3 to introduce the flow path. And now we're seeing an indication. But we need to let it stabilize, so it appears like it is dropping down relatively quick. And let's see where it ends up landing. If it's going to stay on high, or perhaps it's going to start to creep down into the mid-range. So yes, now we're below this particular range and it's flashing, giving us an indication that we're actually out of the range of this particular high range meter. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to hit the high, toggle to medium, and then I'm going to take Victor 2 and bring it to the medium flow, and we'll see if we need to go any further or if the medium flow range is going to be sufficient for this measurement. It looks to me like it's creeping up a bit now, relatively slow, and we'll see where it ends up landing. And it looks like things are starting to somewhat stable out here. And just hitting the 1100s here now. And our test pressure dropped a bit, so it kind of fell right into that 24 zone. So this all worked out perfectly, I would say. So for the sake of time, I'm going to show you guys a quick recording. If I hit the record button one time, it'll just do a quick recording, and just a single data save was sent to the USB. Before we talked about how we set up that constant reading of 5 seconds. So if I hold the record button just for a bit, it's going to bring up a continuous recording option screen. So hold it down, release. The mode's continuous. I hit next. If you had any notes or comments of the particular volume that you were working, you could add some notes in with the touchpad keyboard that's here. But for the sake of time, we're just going to go right to start recording, and we're going to get some auto recordings going. So gives you the data set number, and it notes that we're recording every 5 seconds. So as you can see, we're getting the data to come in. We'll wait for another reading or two, and then we'll go and we'll check our data. So once it is number 4, I'm going to hit stop, and we'll take it from there. So hit stop, everything's saved. So now we can go back to the settings menu to the data recording option and have a look at the file and data. So I'm going to go to show files in USB, and I'm going to go to next, verify I'm at the very last one. That's what we just did. Select open, and those 4 recordings that we have all been recorded. So we got the time, the inlet pressure, the test pressure, the flow rate, and what meter we were on, and the gas type used. So there's a little sanity peer check here that you can just be sure that you're on the right units, that you're recording everything properly, be sure you're on the right flow range. So it's a really good check at the end of a shift to verify that everything was recorded properly as well. And it does it for you automatically. So relatively stable flow, and I think that's pretty much it for that. So if I hit back, we can go to exit, and now that we have a stable flow test, we can work on trying to isolate and safely depressurize the box. So from here, I'm going to first off by just isolating the box from the test volume itself. So we have that sorted out. That's isolated. And then from there, I'm just going to start backing off some of the valves and isolating the system a bit. So I'm going to first isolate Victor 1. I'm going to go back on Victor 2 from medium high, back to the bypass, and go to isolate Victor 3 just to be sure that everything is closed off. So from there, I could safely crack the test volume because I know that I have everything isolated from test volume and beyond with this isolation valve. So I'll take a wrench and I'll crack that. And I could slowly let the volume escape from the box and have that opened. And we did no damage to any of the meters or anything like that because we were already on bypass and we had everything isolated. So from there I can back off my regulator just to ensure that everything else is cleared out. And I could do some final opening of the valves just to be sure that everything's looking good. So I could open up Victor 1, and I could slowly open up Victor 3 to let any additional pressure escape. And that is the way to safely vent and isolate the leak rate monitor box after a test has been performed. That covers our presentation of the Graftel Model 9623 EV. If you have any further questions, feel free to contact us at sales@graftel.com. Thanks.